Now, for more than a year, the Sudanese army has been fighting the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, over control of the country. The conflict has left thousands dead and displaced more than 10 million. Many fled to neighboring Chad. Rights groups say the RSF and allied Arab militias have committed widespread killings, rapes, and other atrocities, possibly amounting to genocide in West Darfur. They're targeting people of one African ethnicity in particular, the Masalit. They were the majority in the city of El Janina in West Darfur until the RSF brutally attacked its citizens last year. Many fled across the border to Chad and are still living in Adre. Our correspondent Mariel Muller traveled there and met survivors of sexual violence.
Since Halima can remember, she has lived in camps for displaced people. Every time she thought she found safety, another attack happened. It was always the same perpetrators and their allies, she says, the former Janjaweed militia, now known as Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. In June 2023, they attacked the area of El Janina, where she lived.
I saw how they killed people. The first day when they attacked, they killed many. They fell down right in front of us. That day felt like it would never end.
Halima, whose name we've changed to protect her, was living with her family at a site for displaced people when she heard the militants arrive on their motorbikes.
They found me in my room. 4 of them threatened me with guns. One choked my neck. The others left the room. The one who stayed raped me. I fought him a lot. I didn't want him to rape me, but I was so scared of his gun. Then I only felt pain.
When it was over, she ran away, stepping over 20 bodies lying on the road. Then she stopped counting. After crossing the border to Chad, Halima felt safe, but couldn't find any medical help. 3 days later, the pain subsided, but the memories still keep her from sleeping. She says the Arab RSF militia attacked her because she belongs to the Masalit, an African ethnicity. We spoke to more than a dozen survivors of group killings and sexual violence. All of them told us the attackers were specifically targeting Masalit, aiming to ethnically cleanse African ethnic groups from Darfur.
He asked, "What's your tribe?" I didn't tell him I was Masalit. I said, "I'm full tribe." He said, "If you're Masalit, I will slit your throat."
They said there won't be any land belonging to Masalit anymore. This is their aim. They don't want Masalit to own land.
The survivor stories are backed up by Human Rights Watch. It has documented numerous atrocities and warned of a possible genocide against the Masalit people in West Darfur. RSF did not respond to our requests for comment. Hawa, whose name we've also changed for her safety, survived a similar attack. She says an RSF fighter entered her home on June 8, 2023.
He loaded his gun to shoot my mom and aunt. He shot, but my aunt dodged the bullet. I said, "Shoot me instead." He said, "I won't kill you. I killed your brothers outside."
He went and shot her 20-year-old cousin. Then she heard her mother and aunt being beaten.
He beat me too. With a whip, a stick, a water container. He then threw me on the bed and started to rape me.
She bled heavily. Days later, she was able to find a hospital where she needed stitches. She still sometimes feels pain when she walks. These women are now in safety in Chad. But many here live in deplorable conditions in the camps, lacking medical support, food, water, and basic shelter. The UN has called this the largest displacement crisis in the world, with more than 10 million people forced to flee their homes. Almost 600,000 Sudanese refugees are now living in neighboring Chad. But aid organizations say massive funding shortages mean they are unable to cope with their needs. In the camp, a group of refugee women have created a safe space where survivors can talk openly and without stigma about what happened to them and their hopes for the future.
My hope is to complete my studies in economics. And I hope to work in a bank, as an accountant, or as a business administrator.
If the situation improves, I want to go to university. I'm a midwife, but I want to learn to be a doctor.
They say all they want is to get their lives back. They're hoping for peace, so they can finally move on.
We're now joined by Pramila Patten, the United Nations Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict. Welcome to DW News Africa. Now, are survivors of sexual violence in Sudan getting the support they need, especially the ones who've fled to neighboring countries?
The reality is that avenues for support for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence are severely constrained due to the widespread conflict and insecurity. Civilians, especially women and girls, are really trapped in an inferno of brutal violence. Last April, on the occasion of the Security Council open debate on conflict-related sexual violence, a Sudanese NGO briefer described to the Council how recurrent attacks on medical facilities, restrictions on communications, and deliberate obstruction of humanitarian aid delivery by the parties to the conflict are making it extremely challenging for survivors to access life-saving assistance, including sexual and reproductive health services. According to that NGO briefer, currently there are less than a dozen obstetricians and gynecologists working in Khartoum. And if we look 14 months since the start of the hostilities, the situation is even more dire today, with El Fasher in North Darfur as the new epicenter of the conflict. Last week, on the 22nd of June, Médecins Sans Frontières, one of the few international NGOs operating in El Fasher, warned that hospitals continue to be attacked and that no outside help can reach the city due to the intensity of the violence.
Right.
And to your question about what is the situation in neighboring countries, I don't think it is any better. Last year, I was in a refugee settlement in Awale, South Sudan, where conditions remain precarious and assistance very limited. I met with Sudanese refugees, many of whom were survivors of sexual violence, and they recounted to me the disturbing details of their journey from Sudan to South Sudan, and how they were exposed to shocking levels of sexual violence. I even met a 7-year-old girl who was raped in the refugee camp.
So you're describing some very desperate situations there, but do we have a clear idea of just how widespread these crimes are in Sudan? I mean, is it even possible to collect that data?
First, I just want to add that I will go to Chad in 3 weeks' time to meet with Sudanese refugees, victims of sexual violence, because Chad has received the largest share of people fleeing Sudan. It's always very hard to get accurate data on an active battlefield, and sexual violence remains a dramatically underreported crime due to many factors, including shame and stigma, but fear of reprisal and lack of access to services or reporting. And it is nearly impossible in the context of the current hostilities to get accurate data because the UN and the majority of international actors have had to leave the country, and the work of civil society is also hampered by rampant insecurity and threats. But we do have some indications of the gravity and the brutality of sexual violence. The annual report of the Secretary General for 2023 documented cases of rape, gang rape, attempted rape, abduction, and trafficking perpetrated against 98 women, 18 girls, 1 man, and 1 boy. And in a single attack, as many as 20 women were reportedly raped. There's also information more recent that we have received about the abduction of over 160 women and girls held in captivity, including reports of these women being raped and kept in slave-like conditions. And we have reports of women and girls abducted in Khartoum state who were taken to other parts of Darfur, allegedly in chains in the back of trucks. And in almost all these cases, RSF elements or affiliated militia were implicated.
Right.
And
So
there are disturbing...
Because you've introduced the RSF. Because you've introduced the RSF, I just want to jump in there because I know that you did speak to their leadership. Have they acknowledged at all the rapes that are happening there? And if so, do they plan to do anything about these atrocities?
Well, since the start of the conflict in April 2023, I engaged with both parties, SAF and RSF. On the 1st of August of 2023, I had a meeting with General Abdul Rahim Dagalu, the deputy commander of the RSF. And I raised with him all these reports that I had at the time. Reports of sexual violence in Khartoum and Darfur, reports of an increase in the number of abducted women and girls, reports about the targeting of medical infrastructure and personnel, giving support to victims of sexual violence, and also brought up allegations about the existence of slave markets in Darfur with women and girls being sold, including into sexual slavery or held for ransom. And I urged him to issue a formal undertaking in the form of a unilateral communique condemning sexual violence and committing to effective measures to prevent and address such violations, including through a time-bound implementation plan, as well as command orders that declare zero tolerance for sexual violence as part of upholding military discipline. He acknowledged, I must say, the gravity of sexual violence in the context of armed conflict. He agreed to issue both the unilateral communique and the command orders declaring zero tolerance for sexual violence, and he did so shortly after the meeting. But unfortunately, I must say that up to now, I do not see any discernible behavioral change on the ground because reports continue to pour in about atrocities being perpetrated by RSF and its affiliated militia. And that is why, in the context of my upcoming visit to Chad and Port Sudan next month, I intend to re-engage with the leadership of the RSF in order to bring to their attention all these reports which I have mentioned, but also to remind them of their commitments and obligations under international law.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for your time, Pramila Patel, the United Nations Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict.